So everyone's here. We have a lot of people registered and a lot of people already on the line, and a big conversation to have this hour. So I'm going to go ahead and launch us in. Um, my name is Stacy Hanna. I am the Director of Research Engagement at AVAC, and I'm really excited to open this conversation. We've got a couple really great speakers with us, but I'm going to just take a minute to kind of frame what we're going to be talking about today. As you know from the title, today's webinar is we're really going to look at kind of the future of HIV prevention, and specifically the People's Research Agenda, which is a tool that AVAC launched about a little over a year ago. I think most people know that AVAC launched the People's Research Agenda, this report in at the R4P conference in Lima in 2024. And this is really an effort to sort of consolidate communities' perspectives around the HIV prevention pipeline, specifically looking at R&D. There's a lot of focus always on kind of community and advocacy as we look at kind of introducing new products. But this is really kind of an effort to say, you know, what does the research pipeline really need to look like, and what are community and advocates' priorities there? I think everybody knows community engagement has really been a core tenet of HIV prevention research from the beginning. But it's really been sort of multifaceted engagement at a lot of different levels, trial site levels, national, global levels. And there's never been kind of before the People's Research Agenda, there was never really a sort of a consolidated voice around what those priorities were for research. And AVAC and our partners, I think, especially kind of over the several years leading up to 2024, really we're kind of looking at the pipeline and some kind of significant evolution in the pipeline shifts, either kind of towards product introduction or back to kind of more basic research for, especially in kind of the vaccines and BNAB space. And we realized it was kind of finally time to sort of pull together these perspectives and have an agenda. When we launched it in 2024, you know, the idea was always that, you know, the PRA would not be kind of a static text-heavy report, something that would sort of, you know, sit on the shelf or sit on a website, but really that it would be kind of a real-time tool that could be used on an ongoing basis to kind of engage across the field, you know, to bring together community, researchers, policymakers, et cetera, funders, to make sure that we're continuing to track and really, you know, to be critical about the R&D pipeline as it evolves and as community priorities evolve. And the idea was that we would kind of update it on an ongoing basis, at least annually. And so in 2025, the plan was to update the People's Research Agenda. And I think it's safe to say that 2025 for our field certainly, and you know, in the world broadly was a year that no one really envisioned. And we really took that to heart when we did this sort of update for 2025 of the People's Research Agenda. I think everybody in our space in HIV prevention knows that that our reality has shifted. HIV prevention has shifted, the global AIDS response has shifted, and R&D has shifted and will probably need to shift even more. And so we really, you know, took this to heart around our kind of updates and our considerations around the priorities laid out in the PRA. And we're really excited to kind of walk through these today. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to my incredible colleague Grace Kamwenda from AVAC, who has been the driver behind this effort from its conception to this call today. And has really done a lot to engage many of our partners and community to make sure that this is truly representative of communities' perspectives. And so excited to hear from her. We also have Dr. Jeanne Marrazzo with us. I think Jeanne is known and probably safe to say loved by everyone on this call. Jeanne's also been through her own journey over the past year, and we're excited to kind of introduce her today as the CEO of the Infectious Diseases Society of America. And Jeannie joined us in 2024 in Lima to help launch the PRA at the beginning. And so we're really excited to have you back with us today, Jeannie, to kind of hear your perspectives and reflections on this past year. Really quickly, housekeeping. This is pretty straightforward. We love, AVAC, we love engagement. So please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat. We do have a chat and a Q&A. We would love for you to kind of default to the chat just to kind of keep things a bit more streamlined, but Grace and I will be monitoring that throughout the call. And we would love to kind of hear your voices and see your faces if you are so inclined. And yeah, I think just to say be inquisitive and be kind, and just remember we're all in this together. And with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Grace.
Thank you so much, Stace. Next. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. And thank you, Lida, for joining us today. It is an honor for me to be part of this conversation around the People's Research Agenda, especially at such a critical time as this for HIV prevention. And today's conversation comes almost full cycle from 12 months ago, when the global health architecture drastically changed, leading to the need for us to literally focus and literally think of how we move forward. And the People's Research Agenda from the beginning, as Stacey has mentioned, was grounded in a very simple but very powerful principle. And that is, HIV prevention research must be driven by the needs, the voices, and the realities of people that are most affected by HIV. Next. So, for people who are not familiar with what the People's Research Agenda is, and I think Stacey talked a little bit about this, I just wanted to explain that the People's Research Agenda is a community-driven advocacy framework that is aimed at holding researchers, funders, stakeholders accountable in what we invest in, what products we develop, and how research is conducted along the way. Simply put, the PRA asks the question, is HIV prevention research actually saving the people most affected by HIV? And the PRA is not a traditional research agenda as we've known before. It's not written by scientists in a room. Communities led the development of this agenda. And it is rooted in community priorities, especially those most impacted. And it is an accountability tool. Most importantly, it does bridge the science and the community together. As Stacey mentioned, this is a living framework. It's updated to reflect shifts in science, shifts in funding, and shifts in the political context. That is where the PRA 2025 update comes in. Next. I just wanted us to take a pause and look back from where we're coming from. Stacey mentioned that we did launch the PRA in October 2024. Lila, at that time when we launched it, for us, it signified a commitment to center communities in HIV prevention research and ensure that science is continuously being shaped by communities. As we're ending 2024, we ended optimistically because we saw strong momentum with Global Fund and PEPFAR committing to reach 2 million people within a CAPFAR. So we ended with a lot of hope, a lot of optimism. But early in January in 2025, it brought major disruptions. Stop work orders, dismantling of USAID programs, but also generally the whole infrastructure that is delivering HIV prevention. Things shifted, and I think the world as we know it changed. But even so this was happening, science continued. It didn't stop. We saw vaccine research showing promise in May 2025. In June, we saw lenacapavir being approved by FDA. This was a major breakthrough for long-acting prevention. And that led to the second half of 2025, where we saw a lot of movement towards access, WHO guidelines, investment in generics, country approvals, and first doses reaching Eswatini and Zambia by the end of 2025. So by the end of last year, the PRA update was launched. And for me, one of the messages that was key as we're ending the year was innovation is here, yes, but our work is more critical now than ever before because of the shifts that we saw in 2025. Next. I love showing this slide to remind us why we do the work that we do. And here is the uncomfortable truth. HIV incidence is not declining fast enough. We all know that. We have seen 1.3 million new HIV infections in 2023. We saw the same numbers in 2024, and that was before the shifts started. But now the biggest question remains, what will it take to get prevention on track? What science is needed at this moment? What research should move forward? And the People's Research Agenda responds to some of these critical questions in terms of where should we be investing in? What products should we be developing? What are the priorities as we move forward? Next. So what the PRA update, including the original PRA, what it does is to track the science in terms of where we are in the preclinical, in phase 1, phase 2, and across up to implementation science. And beyond that, in 2025, what we did broadly as AVAC was also to start tracking the impact of the funding cuts and bringing all the analysis together. We then came together to now look at the first annual update for PRA, which is the interactive real-time pipeline tracker that shows exactly what is progressing, what is taught, and where urgent action is needed. It also highlights gaps in product categories and lay out the priorities that as communities we believe must be protected to avoid losing a decade of progress. What is exciting for me is the PRA update also maps the advocacy path forward for 2026, helping all of us to push for the resources, the commitment, and accountability required to keep research moving and ensure that future HIV prevention choices remain equitable as we move forward. Next. So I know this slide has a lot of things. Don't be worried. I'll not talk about everything, but this really is the heart of the update, the People's Research Agenda update. It talks about where the field stands now under the status column, and it then highlights some of the key gaps that we're seeing in the field. For instance, we do know that on-demand and short-acting prevention products are at risk and at threat. We also know that there's a lot of funding uncertainty for key products in the pipeline. At the same time, we also know that there's a lot of risk around HIV vaccine, even in terms of messaging, information. So there's been lack of support for HIV vaccine research. These gaps are very clear. I will not go through all the gaps. And the whole reason is we want you to be able to go into the PRA and take a look at this as well. But it is very clear that if these gaps are addressed, we will jeopardize what choice look like in the future. And it's important for us to be addressing some of these choices. That is why for the PRA, 2026 priorities focus on ensuring that for all existing products, they need to get into the hands of the people that actually need them. We need to continue to develop an investment case for products that are at risk at the moment, including early phase trials that were stopped or they were paused. We need to continue building investment cases for those. But beyond that, we also continue to say community voices should continue to inform all the processes that we're actually doing. So when you look at this table, which I will refer to it at some point, it's essentially a key resource, showing exactly where advocacy must be strongest in this year. Next. So this is giving you a little bit of a snapshot of the interactive People's Research Agenda, which you can find on our website. And I think we'll share the link in the chat as well. What you see when you go into the interactive People's Research Agenda is clinical trial information across the different product categories. So you're going to see trial information for all ARV-based prevention, multipurpose technologies, preventative vaccines, but also broadly neutralizing antibodies. It's also exciting that when you go into that report, you're going to find a pipeline tracker. This tracker is downloadable and you'll be able to use it. We welcome any feedback that you might have around these pieces. we are happy to make changes or to update based on how the field is evolving. We also have infographics, which you can pull and use them for your meetings, for your advocacy, and many other things. There is also a fact sheet, and I think I've talked about that one previously, that highlight the status of the field, gaps that we have, and priorities for advocacy. So what you see when you go into the PRA interactive report is all these bits. There are different bits, but really what we want to see is this being used for advocacy and moving forward the field as we move forward. Next. I'm coming to an end, but just wanting to leave my final thoughts around how do we move forward. For us, Lily, we're looking at how do we strategically invest across basic research, clinical trials, and implementation science without necessarily putting all investments in just one bucket. We do realize that we need to avoid duplication because resources are very limited. We said in the PRA initial launch to say products that are moving forward should be additive. They should add value to the current toolbox that we have. That message is critical now than ever before. We also need to continue to sustain early phase trials for vaccines, multipurpose technologies, and next generation products because we need to continue building an effective toolkit for the future. We are not done yet. The work still needs to continue. We need to invest in real world studies. You note there that I've said implementation matters. We cannot just develop products and they get filed away. We do need products to actually get to people. But for that to happen, we also need to understand how to deliver them. Who delivers the products, where, and what systems. And for us to understand that, implementation science is still important. So we do need to keep on investing in this, in as much as we are also investing in the actual rollout and the program at country levels. We need to continue doing community engagement. We always say this and will not stop. For us at AVAC and our partners, the good participatory practice continue to be central in our engagement in research. And we continue to call on that. And finally, in a world where designing clinical trials has become so complex because we have many effective tools, we call for the use of adaptive, ethical, and inclusive trial designs that are informed by communities with very clear access plans for successful products. So for any research that is going to be conducted, we expect that access plans should be in place so that it's very clear on what pathway that product will take to get to people who needs it most. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Dr. Jeanne Marrazzo, who will take us forward in the conversation. Looking forward to hear from you, Dr. Jeanne.
Grace, thank you. That was a fantastic way to kick this off. And I am going to give us a little bit of context. First, I want to thank everybody for showing up. I can't believe we have over 200 participants. And looking over the list, I see many of our staunchest allies and most committed fighters for the work that we do. So it's a fantastic way to start the week, especially after in the US Martin Luther King Day yesterday. So what I wanted to do was sort of revisit the context of where we are right now. And I've used the talk that I gave for World AIDS Day as the basis for this. I'm going to try to finish it pretty quickly so we have some time to talk through some stuff. And I really see us right now as we are entering a new year in a place where there's a lot of promise, but there's a lot of peril. So if I could have the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why I think about how I think about that. Grace mentioned that we are in an amazing time with chemoprophylaxis or PrEP and PEP, but there are some challenges that I think we really need to talk about. And there are other opportunities that are looking great. But most importantly, how do we as a group of advocates, researchers, physician scientists, care providers, policymakers find a way forward in this very perilous time? Next slide, please. So the global HIV pandemic, as Grace already mentioned and Stacy already mentioned, we are in a place that is, I think, worthy of celebrating, but we are still not there. And every time I think about that 1.3 million people a year newly acquiring HIV, it really gives me pause. And unfortunately, that is in the context of great coverage, but not superb coverage with antiretroviral therapy. So about a coverage of about 77 to 78%, depending on how you look at it. That translates to many, many people who are living with unsuppressed viral loads and thus represent an ongoing source of infection for many people who are not HIV infected. And of course, that's all happening in the context of the cuts that Grace has already mentioned. Those cuts, unfortunately, as we'll see in a little bit, have disproportionately targeted our most vulnerable constituents, including people already living with HIV, people at increased likelihood of getting HIV, young people, women, key populations, gay men and other men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs, sex workers, and transgender persons, to say the least. Next slide, please. So what are some of these perils? Again, not to belabor the point, but some of these haven't been mentioned yet, and I think it's really important that we call them out. We focused a lot on cuts in US government funding, but it's not just been that. It has also been the chaos that has led to our partner organizations being driven into disarray. And the two that I think of the most of course, are NIH and CDC. That threatens our collaborative work in public health and discovery science, not to mention surveillance for new HIV infections in particular. There's been a requirement for compliance with new priorities, quote unquote, that has affected the way that we use our language and that we are required to use our language in order to get the funding that remains. And that is an explicit threat for against equity right now in our efforts to advocate for equity. We're seeing increasing mistrust in things like vaccines and pharmaceutical interventions, not to mention the confusion that's been sowed by some of the recent pronouncements by HHS. And of course, we are seeing profound workforce challenges in all areas, not just clinicians, but also now people who are doing the fundamental research work and people who've been doing education in this space for a long time. I worry that this is going to really wipe out a generation of people, at least a 5 to 10 year time frame of people who are doing the work that we need to be done. Next slide, please. So I want to just sort of bring this to life a little bit, because I think calling out some of the losses that we have seen both personally and across the board internationally are really important. Very nice paper by Larry Gostin in PLOS Global Health, if you didn't see it, at the end of November, that really outlines cascading global shocks on global health imposed by the Trump presidency. I think many of you know that I was fired last September after filing a complaint that detailed some of the anti-science activities at NIH. And some of you, I'm sure, know that Dr. Carl Diefenbach was also taken out of his leadership role at the Division of AIDS shortly as the new year, as last year was ending, for reasons that were never really publicly specified. And for those of you who don't know, Carl has led the Division of AIDS for almost 20 years. So a really stalwart advocate for HIV research. It's particularly basic science. Next slide, please. And that's relevant to what Grace and Stacy mentioned about the basic science work on vaccines and monoclonal antibodies, and especially cure, which I'm really worried about. We can come back to talk about this. If you haven't seen these slides, there's some very nice slides from the World AIDS Day report from UNAIDS, and just talking about the loss, the human loss of these programs, including access to antiretrovirals, but also including access to chemoprophylaxis and prevention. Really, really challenging for young men and young women, as you can see in that statistic at the bottom there. Next slide, please. And of course, this means that we are not able to get to some of the people who need us the most, right? We are seeing, as Grace mentioned, not an okay trajectory in terms of where HIV incidence is going. There are still major inequalities in who's more likely to acquire HIV, particularly among sex workers, transgender women, men who have sex with men, and people who inject drugs. And as, of course, you lose access to some of the programs that we have championed for years, you're going to see these increasing, not surprisingly. Next slide, please. And my last slide from the UN AIDS report, and this is a no-brainer, but I think we cannot say it loud enough. We cannot yell it from the rooftops loud enough that new infections are going to rise and undermine efforts to end AIDS as a public health threat. And this is just a graphic that shows you what could happen, what might happen if the cuts continue over the course of the next just 5 years. And if you go beyond that, it's clearly going to get a lot worse. One thing I want to mention here, and I may have it later in the slides, but I think something that people don't often articulate as well as they should, a lot of the really positive models looking at the effect of some of our new advances, particularly for PrEP, have assumed that we would continue to achieve the level of viral suppression among people living with HIV that we have. I mentioned it was 77% globally before. Well, if you're taking away PrEP programs and you're taking away antiretroviral treatment access programs, then you're going to have not just a double whammy, but a really synergistic malignant effect on the ability of HIV to transmit and continue to spread in the population. Next slide, please. So that's a lot of peril. And it feels some days like we are heading into a storm, in the middle of a storm, depending on how you're feeling, that threatens to take us out. I want to really say, as both Grace and Stacy said, that this is not a time to despair. It's a time to fight. It's a time to dig in and recognize not just what we've accomplished and why we need to protect that, but why we need to continue to move forward. There are fantastic new modalities, some of which are listed on this slide that I'm not going to go into, of course, in the interest of time, but we've made so much progress in the last 10 years in particular in some of the basic science. Next slide, please. So we've been talking a lot about lenacapavir. I think everybody on this call knows how profoundly impactful this product is going to be, along with cabotegravir. These are long-acting injectable antiretrovirals that have made already a huge splash in terms of their efficacy in reducing the acquisition of HIV. And if you don't know this, just take a look at the wonderful AVAC website that is frequently updated, telling you where we are in the trajectory of clinical trials, looking at lenacapavir in many, many different populations. So far, it looks like it works well in pretty much every place it's been tested. So next slide, please. I won't belabor that point. And in fact, just updated very recently is the regulatory approval landscape for lenacapavir, and this is really going quickly. 14 regulatory approvals, as shown here in green, including very recently Brazil, and then 9 pending approvals in some really fantastic places that I think this has the potential to make a big impact. So it's exciting, but next slide, please. There's always a but, isn't there? Let's not go to the but yet. Let's go to the and first. And I want to just mention that, well, all of us love lenacapavir. Many of us would be absolutely thrilled to see an oral product that might be as effective and somewhat more accessible, just in terms of the ease of administration and control. So if you don't know, be aware of the expressive trials. These are efficacy trials of a drug called MK-8527. It's an oral nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor. It's quite a mouthful. Just when you figured out how to say NNRTI, now it's an NRTTI. But this is a product that is made by Merck. It's incredibly potent. A single dose can reduce HIV RNA in people with HIV very profoundly. really exciting for post-exposure prophylaxis to me is that it has extremely rapid onset of activity, 30 to 60 minutes to achieve protective levels. And it looks like you can potentially dose this drug monthly. So far, so good in phase 1 and 2 studies. Next slide, please. So where are we at? I think obviously this could be a game changer. Talk about community wishes. A potent, safe, immediate, and long-acting oral agent could be a game changer. I think that it would really facilitate community delivery and hopefully uptake, persistence, and coverage. Next slide, please. So here's where we are at with expressive phase 3 trials in many countries with this drug, and you can see that it's a very ambitious agenda. There are 2 very large studies that are getting underway. One is in sexually active cisgender men, men who have sex with men, transgender men, women, gender non-binary people, and then the other one is in sexually active, that's expressive 10, cisgender adolescent girls, young women and women who could benefit from PrEP. I think it's fantastic to see the range geographically of these studies. I do really lament the inaccessibility of many parts of the world where we know HIV is going to take advantage of particularly social disruption, particularly Eastern Europe and Russia. There's no question that stuff's going on there, and nobody has a very good window into doing some of this work there. But this is really something to celebrate and very exciting. Next slide, please. So is it time to declare victory? Some of you have seen me use this slide. When lenacapavir results were announced in Munich a year and a half ago, it was really a jubilant time. People were very excited. I think with reflection, many of us in particular, I have been really thinking hard about the delivery infrastructure for these products. And I already mentioned this issue of assuming that we are going to be able to maintain viral suppression in people living with HIV. Next slide, please. I really like this index. I've shown it at almost all the talks that I've done in the last couple of years now. This is just a index of global conflicts that's updated quite frequently. And it just reminds us, we don't need reminders, unfortunately, at this point of the extent of global conflict. It seems like that's all we read about in the news. But in terms of how it affects the stability of the infrastructure for our populations to access something like lenacapavir, which is an injectable drug, it really can't be discounted. And just in case you're not aware, there are many, many countries that we are seeing an increase in conflict and in violence. Next slide, please. And of course, when violence and disruption and infrastructure denigration or degradation happens, the people who are already the most vulnerable suffer the most. And that's often people who can't support themselves, women, children, people who may be living on the margins of what's viewed as an acceptable lifestyle, quote unquote, in those places. So just a reminder that this is going to really affect our ability to roll out products, particularly products that require infrastructure. Next slide, please. And I'm almost finished. I also wanted to point out 2 really useful tools that the AVAC site has that when we think about the People's Research Agenda, again, we're thinking about who is most affected, who is most going to benefit from the research agenda, and who needs to have the biggest voice in determining what is prominent going forward. And this is a slide from last summer. It's probably not quite as up to date, but it's pretty close, looking at the key population programs that have been terminated across in this case, sub-Saharan Africa. And not surprisingly, some of our biggest partner countries, both in research and in terms of burden, disease burden, have been affected dramatically. And I don't need to tell many people on this webinar that, because hopefully many of you are participating from some of these places. Next slide, please. And then if you haven't seen this, a really sobering metric, you can go to the PEPFAR impactcounter.com, and that will show you how many deaths in adults and children have been estimated to occur as a direct result of the funding freeze and discontinuation of some of the products that we are talking about and some of the programs we're talking about. The bottom part is just a reset because we're now obviously in January 2026, and that was looking at how many lives could be saved if these programs were reinstituted in 2025. So you can ignore that. But I think these numbers are probably an underestimate when we think about how these cuts have been affecting the way that we've been able to take care of people. When you look at the devastation, people's clinics being taken down, research files just sitting around in clinics that had been really vibrant before, there's a lot here, unfortunately, behind these stark numbers. Next slide, please. So I also want to mention something about choice, that a lot of what I think we used to do, particularly, and I say this as a physician scientist who's been in this business for now a while, was to really decide what was best for people, right? We design studies, we design products, we meaning the people who had the funding and could really set these studies up. And I'm not saying that it was all in isolation. I think that the involvement of the community has been pivotal and critical, but I think that we had to learn that we had to listen more. And community-based research design is something that has really informed a lot of what I hope continues to be funded going forward. And we can talk about that if we have time. These studies that are listed here just reminds me to mention that, you know, it wasn't always that the people in charge listened to us saying that some sexual encounters might be infrequent, they might not be planned, or they might not be consensual. So on-demand products were really critical. And this slide just shows you a couple of things we're looking that were really being looked at, including oral prep for cisgender women, also looking at a tenofovir rectal douche, which I think could be incredibly helpful, looking at a rectal tenofovir elvitegravir insert, which is also very exciting, particularly because of the potential, I think, for activity against herpes simplex virus, although we don't know if that's going to really make an impact. So again, choice is critical, and people need to have access to the products they need when they need them. And that's a message I think that's loud and clear. Next slide, please. So just real quick, some of the challenges. We've always had to deal with stigma. We've always had to deal with complacency. We've really relied on a pretty homogeneous portfolio to fund much of our work, and that was the US government. Not to say that other sources, other countries haven't done a lot, but when you look at the amount of funding for things like HIV and tuberculosis, in particular malaria, NIAID was a major player, as was other parts of the US government, USAID, et cetera. We have had slow progress on the HIV front, at least the public understanding of what that is. And even with PEPFAR, when it was at its height, we still had countries that were not PEPFAR countries, and that's where you saw the most incomplete viral suppression and stubbornly high perinatal transmission risks. Again, those threats to infrastructure delivery have always been operative, right? That was operative before. But we now have these new challenges that are truly brutal. I mentioned many of them. One I just want to point out here that I don't think we've grappled with publicly enough is that many of the clinical trials that the US government has funded have been stopped. And we have worked so hard over the last several decades to build trust with the community and to ensure engagement with the trials that were being run. When you just stop the trial, you're telling people who participate in those trials that they're not important anymore. And I can't say how this makes me feel very bad, because I think this is going to come back to haunt us, and it should. And also, I mentioned this deprioritization of basic science research. That's a huge challenge, huge implications for the commitment to develop an HIV vaccine and to hopefully develop a cure. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned the interruption of a pipeline of talent. And this is not just people who are working in labs. These are people who are working in advocacy, people who are working in outreach, people who are doing all the important work to make things happen at the community level. And so getting a loss of those people is really, really going to be a problem in the next decade. Next slide, please. So I want to end on a note of hope. There's plenty of, I think, concerns, but I think the way forward has to involve a few principles, and I've put these down here. We can't stop communicating, and we can't stop communicating vocally, right? HIV still kills one person every minute on this planet. We are on the cusp of major breakthroughs, discovery and implementation, right? So broadly neutralizing antibodies, some of the science around cure, and of course, implementation with long-acting chemo prevention is a very, very, very good one. The diversification of funding sources. We need to no longer assume that the reliable, longstanding sources are available. So we've got to think about other sources. And we have to resist the erasure of our most vulnerable populations. If you can't use the word trans, if you can't use the word diverse, if you can't use the word equity, then we just have to say those words louder and make sure that people hear us. And then again, coming back to the point of this webinar, which is thinking about the people's research agenda, respecting individual choices is going to be really important to assure uptake and impact of our interventions. Next slide, please. So we have to continue to have honest conversations. I do like to point out to people this complacency piece. HIV field has been uniquely favored in the last couple of decades, right? And it has done very well. We've got great money. No one would have wanted to see the flow being cut off so quickly, but it was time for an honest conversation about that. When you look at what kills most people across the globe, again, I'm a huge HIV advocate. I'm not saying one kind of death is different than another. It's actually diarrheal diseases, and it is largely in young children. So we really have to have honest conversations about that. We have to confront the need to sustain the investment, but be willing to prioritize and demonstrate the impact for what we invest. And we can't do this without invoking the community, their knowledge, their strength, and their preferences to help advocate to prioritize research. Next slide, please. So I think that's my last slide. And I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate everybody being part of this. And I look forward to the discussion. So thank you, Stacy and Grace.
Thank you so much, Jeanne. What an amazing and fantastic presentation. So for the next, we have about 15 minutes for a conversation. And from the chat, you can see that there are a lot of people that are also talking about the amazing work that you're doing. I think we can't stop but to talk about that as well. You are one of the people who has led us, and we're really grateful for the continuous work that you're doing for this field. And this presentation was just timely as we're starting 2026 as well. There's been a lot of comments and a lot of discussion in the chat, but we want to be able to open as well for those people who want to come on video or just off mute to just ask you questions and have a conversation with you. This is meant to be a conversation. So I can see two hands, I think. I see Ida Mlala, who would want to come in. So over to you, Ida. Feel free to come on video as well.
Hi, Grace. Are you able to hear me? Please give a go ahead if you're able to hear me.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Thank you. Great presentation from both of you. Jeanne, I really, really loved your presentation. And my first question is going to go to both of you. I know we've had a lot of impact prior to the funding cuts. And within just 1 year, we've gone back by a huge percentage. Just looking at the number of new HIV infections and the number of people that are dropping out on treatment, realistically speaking, Jeanne and Grace, do you think it will be possible for us to just recover from the impacts of the funding cuts? And what will it take for us to be able to reverse this damage. And Grace, looking at the People's Research Agenda presentation, how we've been following the science and or whatnot. My country, Zambia, we're currently rolling out LAN, and we currently have about 490 clients on LAN. And within just a month since we launched LAN, and we are expecting more clients. What do you think, as a country, our ministry needs to put? What are some of the action points our ministry need to put in place to ensure there's not only effective rollout of LAN, but also there's continued support, there's availability of LAN, and also it's affordable and accessible. I know this is a huge gamble, and this is something that we've been thinking about as advocates. How will the government sustain the rollout of LAN, looking at how excited people are, and within a month we have such a good number of enrolled across different populations. But also, from the three of you, this is my last one. What do you think should be our top priorities moving forward in the field of the HIV programming in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months, since we are still under the Trump administration? What should be our top three priorities so that we're able to just sustain some of the gains and maybe reverse some of the damage as we navigate being through the Trump administration and the impacts that come with it, especially with the funding cuts? Thank you so much. I will end here.
Thank you so much, Ida. Very important questions. And I think I would like to ask Jeanne to get us started. You've asked very important questions on how realistically can we reverse the damage that has happened so far. It's a big question, but I think she can get us started.
Yeah, Grace, I'll start and I'll be brief because obviously we could talk about this for the whole day and probably a week. I will say that we are, and I'm just reading the comments in the chats. David Allen and Roger both made some comments about how do we do this? I mean, yeah, we need different funding sources. Yeah, we need to sort of talk about what the right priorities are. I think that, first of all, we have to acknowledge that we have for many years relied on NIH and like-minded organizations, because they had the money, they figured out how to spend the money, right? They prioritized how to spend the money. So they did RFAs for some of the things. Now, when that and you can argue with how those priorities were defined. Maybe they didn't speak to the areas you really care about the most. For example, the dual prevention pill, which Barbara's mentioned several times here, finally getting some attention, took a long time. So I think they in general, however, tried hard to get community input and then did a pretty rigorous effort to prioritize funding opportunities and still push the science forward with an eye towards impact. That's not happening anymore, right? There is ideology now driving not just the erasure of inclusion of key populations, but also sort of saying that because we have lenacapavir, we don't need to do HIV vaccine research or cure research. So we have to recognize that we can no longer rely on what was our sort of North Star, not just in terms of money, but in actual scientific directions. And we have to set up parallel processes and parallel organizations. And that's a big ask, but we absolutely need to do it. So I'll stop there because there's a lot of other stuff to say.
Thank you so much. I'm going to put Stacey or Mitchell on on the hotspot, and I would like you to respond to the question around some of the key priorities in the next 12 months or 24 months. She said 3 priorities so that we manage time. What do you think are 3 key priorities you're looking at?
Grace, that's a tough one. You put me on the spot. I mean, I think just to reiterate a lot of the things that that Jeannie's already talked about, really kind of, I think, facing head on the new reality that we're living in and trying to sort of work through it. I will say, I think one of the things that I love about the People's Research Agenda, and I think that this speaks to kind of a lot of the comments that are coming up in the chat around, how do we make sure that there aren't multiple agendas and that, we can sort of guard against, I think, especially in our field, sort of, product favoritism or, kind of thinking that we have sort of one shiny solution and forgetting, the rest of the pipeline. What we've really tried to do, I think, and we're really looking for inputs and support from this whole community, is to say, ultimately, we need all of these things. And we have been spoiled for choice. Jeannie, I think that's one of the things that I've loved hearing you just speak so candidly about over the past year, is that we have had, maybe in some respects, an embarrassment of riches, and we have been able to kind of look across the board at sort of everything that we need, everything that we possibly might need to eliminate transmissions or finally bring this epidemic to an end. And I think we need to kind of look at that sort of basket, and we have to make a stronger case for why we need ongoing choice, and what ultimately what the kind of the basket of products we are going to need to ultimately bring this epidemic to an end. And that obviously, I think, includes, just going with speed with the products that we have, not thinking that, LEN is going to replace everything. People still need and want a daily, probably a daily oral pill. People want on-demand products. People want short-acting products. But ultimately, we all know that we are going to need a vaccine at the end of the day. And so how do we continue to kind of make the case for that broad basket? And I think, the next, I don't know, 18 to 24 months, I'm just hoping that we all make it through the next 3 years, one down, everybody, 3 to go. But I think in the next kind of 18 to 24 months, we really need to kind of come together to make that sort of broad case for HIV prevention across the board, including R&D.
Totally true. There's a comment in the chat as well about the need us to continuously think about key population as we move forward. I think Julie Patterson mentions that, and I think that's an important point. And Dr. Jeanne also talked to this as well. Jim as well talked to it. I think we need to continuously think about how do we best get products, but also work with key population as community leaders, as people leading the program itself. So I think that's an important thing. But in the chat box, Jim also talked about advocates holding industry to accountability. He mentions the fact that industry has got a lot of money and a lot of resources. How can we start pushing the pedal and kind of holding them accountable to say, you can't just develop products? What can you do to add to the field? And I think that's also very important. I don't know if there are any more hands, but I would want to ask Mitchell to come on video and respond to the third question that Ida asked. Ida asked about lenacapavir. A lot of people are enrolling on it. What do we need to really, make sure that lenacapavir is getting to people and we are really rolling this product right, sort of. I'm also super interested to hear a little bit about your thinking around the priorities for the next few months.
Well, I'm deeply flattered to be invited to join the three of you and feel a little uncomfortable. But Grace, thank you, and Stacy and Jeanne. A remarkable conversation. I think, and I'll actually maybe answer it by asking you a question, Jeanne, in a sense. I think what we see in the People's Research Agenda and what I think you've all said is we do need a rebalanced portfolio. I think we all have to begin to let go of the things we maybe always loved. But who gets to decide? And I think that's, Jeanne, one of the things I'd love to maybe, if you had a minute to reflect on, what do we need to do, to support those who are your former colleagues at NIAID and NIH who are still there? How do we help them make the best possible decisions in a terrible environment? And then in the absence of their leadership and the agency's leadership, how do we rebalance the portfolio? Because to answer your question, Grace, I think for me, it's a lot of what you've all said. We need to really look and interrogate and ruthlessly prioritize the target product profiles of the future. There can be no little iteration on a product. If it's not truly filling a new gap, we shouldn't be doing it. And that's easy to say, but then who gets to actually decide that? It was, as you said, Jeanne, NIH. So What's the architecture of the future? Does the CEO of the Infectious Disease Society of America play a leadership role? Do advocates working in communities lead it? So I think we know we need to rebalance the portfolio, weed out Me Too products, really focus on filling gaps, but who gets to decide in the future?
Well, I can confidently say, Mitchell, it's not going to be me as the CEO of IDSA, but I will say this is something we probably need a summit about. I mean, we really, I don't know that I have heard, or I certainly haven't said that we have lost the direction that the funding provided by NIH and the intelligent, mostly intelligent sort of prioritization of research. We don't have that anymore. When you have, somebody saying that the only way to go is implementation science, it's nothing against implementation science. I could not agree it's more important, but as I think, I can't remember who said in the chat, I think it was, Reve was just talking about how, and Julie Patterson just talking about how, we have to think about that carefully. So who does decide, and how is it done in a way that is global? I think it really is going to require that we all get together and think about this. Looking at NIH as just one funding source. And I would love to talk about that more, but that's going to be a big act. Who should convene this? Who should bring people together? How should it even be, talked about? And I don't know right now, but I think we have to really face it. And the first thing is to talk about it.
Mm.
That's great. I know we're kind of coming to a close, but I was curious, Jeannie, while we have you, I wanted to sort of build on this sort of the questions around pharma, and I think we are all advocates and activists on this line, and we know the role that pharma plays. But I think one thing that we've really recognized in the R&D pipeline is this sort of growing role of pharma. The latest two efficacy programs, or the latest three, have all been run by pharma. With or without the NIH. And so I'd love, especially as we've sort of seen these shifts, I'd love your perspectives on, potentially a growing role of pharma and a lessening role of the U.S. government.
I mean, I think it's absolutely has to happen. When you think back about the early PrEP trials for tenofovir-based products, they were all funded almost exclusively by NIH. I mean, the company provided the drugs, but NIH really took the risk and invested with both lenacapavir as well as the Merck drug that I just mentioned. You are seeing companies step up quite dramatically. But I think, at least as these partnerships have evolved, they've been pretty healthy. My sense is that nothing is perfect, but community engagement, community involvement in these studies has so far been really, maybe not everything we could ask for, but so much better than the early days when people certainly at NIH wouldn't listen to us talking about on-demand PrEP, microbicides, none of that. So I think that partnerships, ethical, forward-thinking, and mutually beneficial partnerships with the right industry partners are absolutely core to how we move forward. How do we make sure those are they are that way? That's another dialogue that we really need to have. But I think it's encouraging that we are seeing this. Now, also foundations, right? The Merck study is also funded in part by Gates Foundation. So don't forget that these studies are huge. Not everybody can do it all. So I think multi-partnerships across stakeholders is going to be the way to go in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Grace,
much.
Go ahead, Grace. Yes.
Yeah, I know we're at time, but I just wanted to say there's a lot of feedback that has come in the chat. We want to acknowledge that and say we're going to review everything. If we do not respond to you, we should be able to, if we need to update the tracker, we'll update it. If we need to update any of the PRA pieces, we will update it. I just wanted to acknowledge the feedback that has come in, and we do look forward to more feedback, just to mention. So take time, go into the different pieces and give us feedback. We'd really love to hear from you. And secondly, just to mention, to say we are going to share the webinar resources, the slides, and also the links to all the resources that we talked about. We are going to share them after this webinar, so you can be on the lookout for that. And finally, to thank everyone, more so our main speaker, Dr. Jeanne Marrazzo. It's always amazing listening from you, always insightful, that you took your time off, you're busy, but you're always there for communities when we need you.
Everybody's time is just as important, though. But I thank you, Grace. Everybody's amazing. So really, really, it's my honor to be here.
Thank you. Over to you, Stace, to close us out.
I mean, I'm not going to repeat everything that you said, Grace. I want to say thank you to everyone, to all the participants. We have to think together and we have to think critically. And so I actually really want to thank everyone for your critique, for paying attention, for paying close attention, for fighting for what you believe in. That's what we have to keep doing. We are ending this with a call to action. I can't think of a better one. And Jeannie, I think there's so much love for you in the chat, and just thank you for reminding us that we have got to keep our foot on the gas, and we've got to keep fighting. Like I said, the PRA it's a living document, and this is one of many engagements. Just to reiterate, Grace, please keep your feedback coming. We are an open door, and this conversation is going to continue. And Grace, thank you for driving this so beautifully, Jeannie, and just thanks again for your leadership and your power. Thanks all. We will talk to you soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year.